to another episode of Many Roads Lead to My name is Roland Heap.
My name is Gareth Freeberg.
And this is episode 29 of our little podcast. And as this is actually a German podcast, we'll just have to switch to German for a second. So please, if you are not very fluent in German, you can either listen to some gibberish or you can skip a little bit ahead because we have to get our listeners from Germany a heads up.
Yeah.
Give them a heads up of what's going on here. Okay, ja, also nochmal herzlich willkommen, liebe Hörer. Tja, die zweite Folge auf Englisch ist jetzt
ist denn
hier
los, sag mal?
Ich weiß auch nicht. Muss das jetzt sein?
Ja.
Genau, gibt es da nicht schon genug von? Ja, ich weiß auch nicht. Also, wir haben das ja schon mal gemacht mit dem James Gesso. Der ein oder andere erinnert sich. Oder die ein oder andere. Und und wir interessieren uns ja auch für viele Menschen, die leider des Deutschen nicht so mächtig sind. Obwohl Shane, unser Gast heute, ja gesagt hat, er hat das immer sogar 2 Jahre gelernt.
Ja.
Wir haben ihn ermuntert, das doch jetzt wieder aufzunehmen. Und vielleicht können wir in ein paar Jahren dann mal auf Deutsch mit ihm podcasten. Anyway, der gute Mann ist halt ein Amerikaner und deshalb haben wir uns mit ihm auf Englisch unterhalten. And that's why we're gonna switch. Deswegen wechseln wir jetzt wieder auf Englisch, denn wir hoffen natürlich, dass viele Menschen aus dem Rest der Welt auch hören und ja, da wird es wahrscheinlich auch viele Leute geben, die kein Deutsch können.
Ja.
Wir hoffen, ihr versteht trotzdem was. Wir machen das jetzt so wie bei Jagd auf Rote Oktober, also die Untertitel sind dann noch eine Weile auf wie war das, Russisch oder so und dann wurde es Englisch, ne? Hier ist genau umgekehrt.
Ich weiß es gar nicht.
Super guter Trick, wie sie das mit den Untertiteln gemacht haben und
Ja.
der russischen, die reden ja alle Russisch in Jagd auf Rote Oktober.
Ja.
Okay, aber das gehört jetzt hier nicht hin.
Ja, genau.
All right.
Okay.
Let's go back to English. Welcome, everybody
Yes.
on the planet
Yes.
and beyond.
Yeah.
So, as we mentioned before, this is episode 29, but it's actually only the second episode that we've done in English. So, bear with us. Our guest today is Shane Stott. Shane Stott is the co-founder of the ZenFloat company. And the ZenFloat is, one could say the first affordable and also actually transportable floating tank, although it's not technically a tank.
It's more a tent.
That's why it's called ZenFloat tent.
Yes.
Exactly. And a floating tank, for those who don't know, just a very quick rundown, is if it's a tank, it's a big kind of a bathtub with a lid on it, and inside is body temperature water, which is saturated with a certain kind of salt. And when you're in the tent, you are floating. That's why it's called float tank.
Yeah.
Not on the ceiling, but on the water.
Yeah.
And as the body temperature and the water temperature are the same, and as it has a lid and it's pitch black, and you have earplugs and it's super, you don't hear anything. All your senses are shut off and you're floating in space. And if you do this for some time, some interesting effects can happen. What these are, we'll talk about with Shane, because he's been doing this for quite a while. And he has been developing the float tent because those tanks usually are very expensive. You can find them somewhere in your city, maybe in a float tank center.
Yeah.
And you can basically rent them for an hour. But if you're really into floating and you love it and you want a tank in your home, it's usually been a very expensive endeavor till the ZenFloat came up. And it was a very successful Kickstarter campaign a few years back. And now you can order it at zenfloatco.com. But of course, there will be show notes with links. But if you Google ZenFloat 10, Zen like in the Buddhist term Zen, then you can, I'm sure, pretty easily find the website and get all the information there. But of course, there's also going to be the interview with Shane, which we did and which you can listen to now. And we hope you enjoy it. If you like it, please let everybody know about this podcast. Even if people don't know German, they might still want to subscribe and occasionally check if there is another English-speaking podcast, because, some people don't speak German, but we want to talk to them, so we use English. And maybe you also want to learn some German, then you can listen to the German podcast, the episodes. All right. If you're interested in the podcast, I think, you know what, I don't even want to name the website because it's German. It's Viele Wege führen nach. It's so difficult.
Yeah.
So I don't know. If you found this podcast, I'm sure you'll find the other ones as well. We have also a Facebook page, but it's very difficult to pronounce. Actually,
Yeah, that's the downside of such a complicated title for a podcast.
Yeah, we should just be like super podcast or
Yes.
cool guys or something like that, but it's more complicated. Anyway, we hope you enjoy the following conversation, and without further ado now, here we go with Shane Stott, founder of Zen Float Co.
It's funny, I took 2 years of German in junior high school,
Oh,
but I
that's
can't,
good.
Dann können wir
but
auch
I can't
Deutsch
speak
reden.
it.
Yeah.
Maybe, do you understand a little bit?
A little bit, yeah.
Wie geht es dir?
Like, was ist das auf Deutsch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I haven't used it, and this is the first time I've been bummed out that I didn't use it and remember it, because this would have been perfect.
There
Yeah.
would have been, yeah. Well, maybe next time, we can do it in a few years when you have honed your skills.
I'll just come live there for a couple months and learn it.
That's the best way
Immersion.
to do it. Yes, my son is now 10, and we basically spend like a few weeks every year in the States with friends, and he speaks fluent English because of that. And of course, I usually only let him watch movies in English because I don't know if you're aware, in Germany everything is dubbed into German, which is really a horrible thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't let him watch most of it. And whenever he watches like an American movie or TV show, then we watch the English version. So he kind of keeps it going. So that's actually a good way to learn a language.
Yeah.
It's probably effortless for him. Just
Yeah, it is.
Easy.
It's amazing when you're that age. I mean, basically we started when he was born, and every year he's been there for a few weeks, and then he picks it up, and people come to our place, and we speak English for a few weeks most of the time, and so that's great.
That's neat.
So whenever you're around, just give us a call.
Okay.
Yeah, we are probably not in the most interesting part of Germany. We are in Dortmund, which is there's a area called the Ruhr area, which is actually the heaviest populated area in all of Europe. I don't know, like 12 million people live here or something.
Holy
like that.
moly.
Yeah.
And it's like a whole bunch of I sometimes think it's a bit like LA in a way that it's like, I don't know, 10, 15 cities kind of merging into this one big thing. But it's more like it has been traditionally an industrial area, and of course, cities like Berlin or Hamburg or Munich are way more interesting. But it's a workman's place.
I gotcha.
Kind of, so
Yeah. Yeah. Coal mining area. So.
Oh, okay.
calm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So
By the way, where are you located?
yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
Utah is.
I feel like we might have maybe 1.5 million, 2 million. I don't know. It's not too big,
Mm-hmm.
but it's you can tell it's booming. It's a valley, so we're totally surrounded by mountains.
Yes.
And when I was a child, half the valley seemed fairly empty. But now, I'm 32, and the valley is about full, almost edge to
Okay.
edge. So yeah, it's definitely growing fast.
And you like it there? It's a good place to be?
Yeah, I lived in LA for a couple years, and I lived in San Francisco for a year. And there's things I like about other places, but ultimately, this for me still feels like home.
So you were also born in Salt Lake City? Or
Yeah.
in that area?
I was
okay.
born and raised in Salt Lake. Yeah.
Okay, so that's home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, some kind of, that always feels like a good thing.
And I love the outdoors. I like downhill mountain bike and camp and boat. And Utah has just it's got outdoor stuff just everywhere, like recreational stuff. It's pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Cool. All right. So outdoors is the one thing, but then there's the tank, which is like
Indoor nothing.
indoor nothingness.
Yeah.
So perfect. Well, yeah. Shane, why don't you just start a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how did you get into floating?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, my name's Shane Stott, 32, out of Utah. That's the simple details. But how I got into floating is kind of crazy. I come from a background of panic and anxiety, and really ridiculous panic and anxiety. And it was about 10 years ago I had my first panic attack, and I was in Las Vegas, and I had been burning the candles at both ends. Pulling a lot of all-nighters, drinking, not taking care of myself. I was living in a new place. Things weren't going right with the girlfriend, and lo and behold, I wound up in Las Vegas at a trade show, and I finally pushed it too far. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the anxiety panic feelings, but I was convinced I had gone insane in an instant. In a moment, my body was shaking, and my vision was trembling, and just the fear kind of cycles on itself, and it ramped up and up, because once you see these physical signs, you believe, oh, something is wrong, and then you go into your head and you go, well, maybe I've finally gone, insane. And when I was young, my uncle had schizophrenia, and
Oh, that doesn't help.
no, and he got it when he was like 18, 19. It finally onset, and it definitely ruined his whole life. And it's a big issue and story in my family. He's dead now, but there was always a piece of my subconscious that believed I could, just get schizophrenia one day. And so this moment 10 years ago, when I was 21, 22, in the moment, the anxiety, to me, the only way I could understand it was schizophrenia, and I lost it. And I was alone by myself in a hotel room, and I remember thinking, like, how could I calm myself down? And I ended up turning on the bathtub and just laying in the warm water and putting my ears under the water, and it totally soothed me. And which was weird, because it didn't mean anything at the time. But that it soothed me enough to get home, and then I had to get into a counselor. And this is kind of a longer story, but
Yeah.
I had to get into a counselor. I got onto medications, and I just started working on my mental health, and it took a lot of years to work back. And I would say one of my big breakthroughs in my mental health was about 5 years into it, maybe a little less. I had a therapist really recommend meditation, and to me, it seemed pointless. I couldn't understand how doing nothing would really do much for me, but I decided to try it, and I tried guided meditations, and I would do them every night, and it really, really helped permanently. Like I say permanently, but if I was meditating, I was much calmer every day. The panic and anxiety were much easier to deal with, and so meditating kind of became a staple in my life. And I was looking for, as a typical American, an easier way to meditate, which is stupid. But that's when I stumbled onto the Joe Rogan video. I stumbled onto isolation tanks, because they basically blocked out all the sensory input, so it made it easier to focus, easier to be comfortable. And then this one video of Joe Rogan, you guys have probably seen it. It's got the animations, and it talks about kind of what you experience in a float tank. But I fell in love with this float tank video. I got obsessive about it. I just knew I had to float, and I knew it was going to be my answer, because meditation worked so well for me. So at the time, this is probably 5 years ago, there wasn't float centers like there are now. I mean, even right now in Salt Lake City, there's a few float centers within a short drive, but at the time there was nothing. The closest one was like 6 hours away, and then it was like, okay, I could spend the money to travel and go float, or maybe I could buy a tank. And I was looking for tanks to buy, and there was nothing. I mean, the cheapest I could get a float tank was maybe $10,000, and then you'd freight it in and somehow try and get it in your basement. Usually they're pretty big. So I just decided, I was fairly handy. I decided I could just build a float tank. And I found a farming fertilizer tank that would fit my body laying down. And I was like, okay, I could get this. I could cut it in half, move it into my basement, and then I could, frame it and insulate it, kind of like a home or something, or maybe like a hot tub would be a better comparison. And I just took on the task of building a float tank. And I was thinking at the time, I was like, there's got to be other people like me. I couldn't be the only weird person out there who wants to float affordably. So I decided I was going to build this thing, and I was going to take pictures, video, save my receipts, and put it all online. And I did exactly that. And it was a big battle and learning curve. But finally, I had my own float tank in my basement, and I started floating every single day. And it dramatically changed my life. I went from anxious every single day, at least to some degree, to days of having no anxiety and no panic. And it was because I was spending, an hour to 2 hours a morning just floating and zeroing in on that calm, peaceful, meditative feeling. And it was humongous for me. And what made it even cooler was all of a sudden people around the world were reaching out and building my tank in their homes, or there's even float centers with my tank now. And it was crazy for me. I was part of this movement of home floaters. And the home floating is what eventually led to me meeting my partner William. He's from England, and he now lives in China. And he reached out, and he was asking questions about the float tank design and that sort of thing. and I was helping him with just simple little ideas. And then we built some trust and some friendship, and he reached out and he's like, dude, would you want to build a float tank out of, like a flexible canvas material, like a waterproof canvas? And I was like, oh my God, that this is how you would make floating affordable, accessible, shippable around the world. And that's when we started the idea, and we designed what's now known as the float tent for a couple years, and we took it to Kickstarter. We had a smashing success. We did like 300,000 on our opening month on Kickstarter, and we funded, and we're off and running, and it's just crazy to be part of this. And it all stemmed from the worst moment of my life. So that's even weirder.
Well, but that's actually a great way to look also at the great worst moments of our lives, that they are good for something, and if you can find the thing that it actually was for, then you can build something great out of it. I mean, you're a perfect example for that.
Isn't that interesting? It's like what's if you believe there's purpose to the downfalls or to the trials and tribulations, they can really turn into something beautiful.
Yeah, totally. When you started with the meditation, you mentioned you use guided meditation. Just to backtrack a little bit, so
Yeah.
that's basically somebody talking to you while you were meditating. Was that what you did in the beginning?
Yeah, exactly. So, guided meditation, like you said, is someone guiding you through it, telling you kind of what to think about. But I love this one lady named Karen Leonard. She did my favorite one. She just had this most soothing voice. But in the beginning, if you just try and meditate, it's hard. Your brain's jumpy. It's like the attention span of a gnat. Like you can't focus. And then after using guideds, it gets you in the feeling of kind of directing your mind. And then from guideds, there's even some guideds that are really loose where they tell you, just feel and just be aware of your breath. And so they help you train to meditate. Yeah, you guys probably know this. Some of your listeners might not know this.
No, that's always a good topic. I mean, we talk about meditation quite a lot, of course, but on the other hand, it's always good to hear from people how their specific practice started out or works, like, because it's show is called "Many Ways Lead to Rome." So, and every person has his or her own way, and it's always great to hear the specifics from people. So it was interesting. So you basically, when you had your first big panic attack, you went into kind of the bathtub without ever thinking
Yeah.
about it. It was just also another interesting point. You're in the worst place of your life, but also your something inside of you tells you instinctively what to do, and leads to the float tank, which is a few years later, as I understood. Correct? Is it true?
Yeah, and isn't that weird? Like I guess it just made sense to me that, a bath could be soothing, and putting my ears underwater, I could hear my heartbeat. But it's so interesting to me that I ended up floating, because I mean, it was almost like a natural, just really weird. I don't know how that worked out,
I
just
mean,
like
it's
it did.
probably it. I mean, just thinking about it right now, it may have something to do also with the womb. When you're in your mother's belly, everything is perfect. You're
Hmm.
kind of floating in the warmth, and everything is perfect. And maybe there's something deep
Some
inside of
deep
us.
connection there.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I would think so.
So and then it took a couple of years for you, and you did some therapy, and but then you found the float tank, as you said. So just briefly, I mean, we're gonna probably mention it in the beginning, but just for the people who haven't heard our first episode, just what exactly do you do in a float tank, or how does it work? What's the float tank?
Yeah, yeah. So let me explain the float tank as far as I'm concerned about it. So the float tank, you are eliminating or removing as much as you can all of the stimulus in all the physical stimulus. So that's all the five senses. It's like sight, sound, touch. I'm missing some senses, but you guys sound. Basically, you get in this pitch black tank, so you can't see anything. The water is skin temperature, and it's filled with tons, like 800 pounds of salt in a very small area. And you're lying on your back in the water, and the water's skin temperature, so you can't feel the water. After a while, you can't feel the air or the separation. So now you're not feeling your skin, you're not seeing. Your ears are underwater. Usually you have earplugs, so you're hearing very little, maybe your heartbeat. Like I said, you can't see, so all of your senses are just reduced. And for me, I kind of think of floating in a couple ways. There's a few different ways to float, but how I think of it is there's the meditative floats where you get in and you are purposefully attempting to turn the thoughts off. I usually do that by like a breath awareness, counting backwards, and I'm purposely going, do not think, and I can get there. But then the other type of float I do, and I think there's going to be a whole breakout in floating by just the kind of floating where you get in with the purpose of thinking or coming to a conclusion. And most people let this happen naturally, but depending on what I'm up to in my life, I will purposely decide what the float's going to be, if I'm going to go in there and think or if I'm going to go in there and meditate. And sometimes it changes, but those are the kind of the two main ways I think of floating.
So basically, you have an intention when you enter the float tank, and then you put your energy into it, and then of course your attention, and somehow a result, whatever it is your intention, comes out of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In the mornings, if I just wake up and go hop in my float tank, my mind's very turned off. There isn't a lot of chatter or things to think about as much. But if I go in at the end of the day, I've got so much that has happened and I'm thinking about that oftentimes I'll go in and continue thinking. And that's different for everyone, but I found that morning floats are easier to think about nothing because it's that state, that state when you're just waking up. I kind of go in there with that state and it seems easier to meditate.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly. Sometimes what is it called? There's even some word for it. I don't get it right now. But sometimes when you're in bed in the morning and at night, even when you fall asleep and you have some kind of a problem that you've been working on the whole day, sometimes that's the point where actually you get this one idea that kind of helps you solve that problem.
Totally.
So yeah. So like the computer is shutting off, but something is still working. And
for sure.
Yeah, the subconscious is constantly going. I don't know if you guys are the same way, but like I'll go to bed with issues and I spend the whole night dreaming about some form of the issue or some thinking of it through it. It's weird.
Never happens to me.
Yeah, I bet not.
Yeah, no. It's interesting because some people, I mean, to me it's totally the other way around, because with meditation it's the same thing. When I meditate in the morning, I'm usually already thinking about the day, but when I've got when I did my work and can wind down and then sit down to meditate, I'm having this feeling of I've got to accomplish something. Now I can kind of relax. So it's the other way around.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me it's a mixed bag. This morning I had it was very difficult for me to meditate because all the chatter in my head. But the day before it was perfectly fine. So it's. But I only meditate in the morning, so the morning hour is right for me.
I just started are you guys familiar with the Miracle Morning book?
No, never heard of that.
It's a book where, the only reason I started is because a friend of mine, Tim, he got on this Miracle Morning thing, and basically you're trading in sleep for exercise, meditation, and like thankful type journal. But I did my first morning this morning. I'm looking at the rower; it's sitting right next to me now, but it was awesome. I really worked out hard and I woke up extra early. And then at the end of my workout, I just sat there and turned everything off. And it was really a good place. Like I was really able to turn the thoughts off and just feel my body, the pulse, the air, the breath. And it was nice. I don't know why I threw that in, but this Miracle Morning, I'm really hoping it pays off because it felt good this morning.
Well, it's interesting because many spiritual paths, of course, they do their morning program. I mean, I know this. I've done it for I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years, where I did some mantras and meditation in the morning, and it was one of it was a challenge because of course you have to wake up an hour earlier or 1.5 hours earlier to do all that, but it does pay off. I mean, not always in a tangible sense, but somehow the day floats better and you're just more present. But we had our kid, and now the morning program changed a little bit.
Oh, you can say that again. I have a 3-month-old, and oh my god.
Oh.
Congratulations, and I'm sorry because now then your morning program
I feed him at 7 a.m. So now, okay, I get up at 6 a.m. and get my Miracle Morning in and then feed him, and we'll see. But yeah, oh my God. So the kid changed everything naturally, but I was assuming I could keep a lot of my habits, but the habits go out the window with a newborn. Like floating, the gym, exercise, Oh man,
Yeah.
it's up to
Yeah,
him.
it's totally. But actually, that's a great. I mean, that's probably a topic for a different conversation. But I think it's really interesting to see or look at a kid as, in a way, a spiritual teacher. In a way that you have to do it. There is no in or out. You kind of if the, I mean, for a woman, it's even worse. Like if you're
Oh yeah.
feeding, if you're breastfeeding, for example, and the kid wakes up at night and it's screaming. There is no option. You have to wake up, feed the baby, and you have to do it every 2 hours for I don't know, a half a year or a year, whatever, however long you want to do it, and then everything else with the baby, it kind of becomes your teacher and really doesn't give you an out. You have to do it.
Seriously, and sometimes it feels heavy, but then there's no choice, so it's not as heavy.
Yeah, if you can just let go into the thing that you have to do it,
Yeah.
then you can actually enjoy it. And of course, I mean, a baby is a great addition to anyone's life, no doubt about that. But it does make you change, of course.
Oh, it does, and I feel like I'm healing. So I have a little son, but just the love and the life, like the priorities in my life, it just feels like healing, and it made my life feels more purposeful. And I guess you have to be a parent to understand it, and they always told me that before I was a parent, but I get it.
Yeah, I mean, the love that you feel for your baby is incomparable. I mean, there's no other love, or I mean, I personally, I mean, the love to my wife and the love to my baby and maybe the love to my spiritual teacher. That's the three big loves that would remain,
Uh-huh.
in a way. And it's interesting to see that that it's just a great reminder that, I mean, what all you need is love. That's it. That's basically what you need.
Yeah, and it makes projects and business seem like about 10 notches smaller in
Right.
the grand
Yeah.
scheme. It's interesting because I
So,
mean,
Yeah.
but
oh, go ahead.
excuse me. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say up until now, my career and business and projects took number one priority. I mean, my relationship with my wife took number one and a half, maybe. It was
Yes.
bad. It was like I found my value in what I could do in the world, and now I take so much value in my family. So it's just weird. It's weird for me to watch the shift in myself, I guess is how I'd say.
So you say your son is 3 months old. So that means that when you were doing all the float tent research and kickstarting and everything, that also happened. So basically, your wife was pregnant and then your baby was
Y-
born. I mean,
Yeah,
roughly.
the timeline, like got our Kickstarter in like 2000, May of 2014. We finished. We got the money, and then we started shipping the tanks in fall. Then my wife got pregnant in the fall, and the book actually came out right when my son was born a few months ago. That's the Float Tank Cure book, and I was trying to take care of a brand new baby and get all these books taken care of. So that's how the timeline kind of went.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to do. Um, so how? Let's talk a little bit about your personal floating habit because you've been doing it for a while, very intensely. And how how do you do it? I mean, just for the listeners who haven't ever used a float tank, just basically, I mean, what do you do? How do you get in, and what do you do in the tank? Do you have any specifics? I mean, you just mentioned a few of them
Yeah.
earlier, but can you maybe elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so if I was gonna give advice on people who want to get into floating and get the float habit going, my advice would be that a lot of times people, and you guys probably know this, but as a lot of times people get into new hobbies or interests and they go absolutely overboard. They trade in everything in their life to get, let's say floating, and they may go floating constantly. And so when I started floating, I had a tank in my basement and I could float constantly, and I got huge results out of it. But the flow habit for me is very much like a gym habit, or let's say an exercise habit. So the real value is what happens to your life when you're in the habit of, let's say, floating. So I always push people, if you're going to try floating, don't go overboard. Just start going maybe once a week max, maybe once every couple weeks, and get the habit going, and you'll see the results in your life. And I just really steer people away from going constantly every day and then burning it out and not sticking to it, because the real value comes in the long-term habit. But as far as floating, let me think. What would I recommend? I'm not, I hate to be a self-promoter, but my book gives excellent ways to get started. And there's so many reasons to float. If you're floating for physical pain, you can float quite often and get those results quite often. If you're floating for anxiety, panic, you're good to get the habit going. If you're floating just for spiritual exploration, maybe that's every 2-3 weeks. But definitely the power of the habit. I don't know what kind of questions do you have? Sorry if I could ask you to elaborate a little more.
Well, I mean, maybe we can talk about, like, for example, when you started out, you were uh, mentioning that you were suffering from panic and anxiety, and I could imagine that a lot of people do the same, and they think and hear, "Wow, that sounds like a great thing," but then you hear that you're supposed to step into a dark chamber in water
Almost
and
like a coffin.
a
Yeah,
little bit like a coffin. I mean, your Zenflow tent is a bit different. We talk about that later for sure. But most of the tanks that you can find, if you can find them, because here in Germany it's a bit difficult. Unfortunately, it's not as many as we would wish to. But so just to reassure people, I mean, like, well, how do you do that? You're already suffering from panic and anxiety, and then somebody tells you step into this dark tank with water.
that's a
It
that's a great point, and a lot of people have this fear. And in fact, when I tell people about floating, that's usually where people go. Is they go, oh, the results sound nice, but I don't think I could get in this water enclosed pitch, black area and close the door. And one of the things that I know a lot of people do, and we recommend too, is float with the door open. Your first time, if that's a concern for you, just hop in and just float with the door open. It's still a very relaxing feeling, and you're trying to get used to the tank anyway. And if you feel comfortable on your first float, you could close the door for a few moments or a few minutes, whatever that is. But if so, coming from firsthand knowing what panic and anxiety is like, I would say it is worth the fight, at least to go to the float center a few times and see if you can find comfort with the door closed if that bothers you, because the results are humongous, humongous. So it's worth trying to get over that fear.
could you say kind of what the benefit was? I mean, like, what did change inside of yourself, like with the panic and anxiety? How did
So,
floating help? Can you
yeah, this is
say that? Or
great question. Totally could. So I call it, so when you're in panic and anxiety, you have like two modes of being alive. And one is you're asleep and dreaming, and one is you're awake and ruminating and obsessing and thinking and replaying these scary thoughts in your mind. And you get used to those two states. It's either on or off. It's either sleeping or anxious. And at the time when my anxiety was worse, I would wake up at like 4 a.m. Wide awake, and the thoughts would instantly turn on. If I'm crazy, am I going to be okay? Why am I so nervous? What's going to happen to me? Am I going to die? And so I would just wake into the rumination and the thoughts, and then I would spend my day battling them, trying to distract myself. Maybe it was exercise, maybe it was alcohol, trying to escape the spinning thoughts of anxiety. And at the end of the night, I'd be so exhausted, I'd turn off and go to bed. So what happened for me with floating was I was practicing a new state. So when I was in the tank, I was meditating, and this could be the state of meditation, the state of float, very same type thing. But you learn what it feels like with practice to feel very calm, comfortable, soothed, no stimulus, nothing firing your anxiety, nothing to see, hear, do, anything. And that state of float or state of meditation is a state you got to practice, because once you learn that this feels good and this is okay and I don't need anything more, I don't need to think of anything more, this state, that practice is what you can draw out when you're back in your life. So I noticed that as I floated more and meditated more in my life, when I would feel anxious, I could go to the other state I had practiced. I knew what it felt like to, that floating or that meditation feeling. I could draw it out as needed, or I could go there as needed. Or when I'd get nervous, I'd go, it's okay. Just think of what it feels like to be calm and peaceful. Feel that, draw that out, and I practiced another state and I could draw on it. That would be the best way I would explain it.
Hmm.
My body was learning there's a third way, and it's that calm, peaceful, meditative, floating way of feeling. And I could swear that you practice, your body enjoys it, and your body goes there more naturally. I didn't feel like I always made a conscious decision to be more peaceful, but it just happens because I was practicing it.
yeah, so basically the float tank shows you a different way, and then outside of the float tank you can also practice getting back into that state, and then of course extend it over the day.
Yeah, it's like mental. It's like a, it's compared to I would compare it to like a mental toughness. So okay, so I joined Toastmasters. Are you guys familiar with the public speaking Toastmasters?
No,
No.
Toastmaster.
Yeah, so it's basically a club you go to each week and you
Okay.
speak in front of 20, 30 people. But for me, the speaking was made me very, very uncomfortable. And it was one of my challenges, and I started going and just making myself do it. I was almost going for the exposure therapy type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But after I would go to speaking and go get in front of the crowd, I got used to the feeling of being comfortable in front of a crowd. And then as I would go up there, I was used to it, and I would draw it out, and I would know what it's like before as I would start. If this makes any sense, it's like you know what the state's like, even though you're going back into the anxious situation. You've practiced. You know what it feels like to be calm in front of people. And it's a very familiar to me to floating or meditating. Like you get back in your anxious life, but you know what it's like to be calm, and it's the same type thing.
It's interesting because I mean, it always seems to come down to like experiencing something like a calming sensation, and then remembering that when you are in an uncomfortable situation. I mean, it's the same with, like, I mean, we talk sometimes about psychedelics in the podcast, and like when people have a good experience that with a psychedelic that can open them up in a way that they can go back to that state they have experienced and kind of draw energy and peace from that.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And of course there's other things. I mean, meditation is of course a way to do it, or I mean, some people do it with sports. You know, they work out and then they get into a calm zone, and then they can draw into that. So that seems to be a very important point.
Yes. On the psychedelics, I totally know what that's like, and it's funny. I had very amazing psychedelic experiences that were just beautiful, and then I had the last one I had was just hell on earth. And I can very easily go back to the hell on earth one too. So it's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And yeah,
Yeah. How long do you prefer to float? How long is a floating session? Your floating session?
Yeah, I used to float an hour to 2 hours, and I left it really
Oh,
loose.
okay.
I know, and then what happened is as I got the float tent and was floating, weekly, I float shorter times, and it's almost like I am going back to the long floats. I've had enough people tell me, they're like, dude, I mean, I get 75% of what's out there on under an hour or an hour, but they said the real breakthroughs come from 2, 3, 4 hours. So I'm going back. I feel like I've lost my way a little bit, because I really love all floating is good. An hour is good, and you get the calm, peaceful relaxation. It happens in an hour, no problem. But like Duncan Trussell, he'll float for hours and he'll have huge breakthroughs. And so I feel like I've got to go back and get some of these huge breakthroughs, and I just got to float longer. But sometimes it's hard to find that much time to sit out.
right. Especially when you have a 3-month-old
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah. So that'll
But
be
it's interesting
tricky.
that you mentioned that, because, as I said, in Germany it's a little difficult, at least in some areas, especially in our area, to find a floating tank, and they charge you quite a lot of money for an hour. But
70
can be
euros.
about 70 euros, 50
Ooh.
euros. I mean, it's really expensive. But fortunately, just a couple of weeks back, I went to Holland with my family, and by chance, when it was a very small village by the sea, there was a floating center with 2 great tanks. And so I figured I only have a week, and I really need to recharge because I had a very busy year. And so I went there every other day for sometimes 2 hours,
Awesome.
1.5, 2. And it was interesting because I never floated that long, because I usually only had like 1 hour sessions. And also, as you say, you kind of have to learn to float. In the first few times, you kind of still getting used to this whole thing, because it's so weird, not weird, but unusual. I mean, there's no place on Earth, maybe the Dead Sea, but no, but there's sun and people. I mean, there's no place on Earth where you have that specific feeling,
Yeah.
like in
It's
a float
totally
tank.
new environment, new to humans, for sure.
And so now I was feeling a bit more comfortable. And then when I did those long floats, then I could also feel like more the especially the dissolving, of everything happening. And it was so funny because there was one, how the ego works is so funny because I think it was my second float and I was in there for more than an hour, and then suddenly everything dissolved and got big, no body anymore. The universe was just immense, and ego was basically kind of dissolving. But then of course it came back like, oh my god, maybe you're dying because the tank, there is no air. And it was so funny because I had to laugh a little bit, but of course it took me out of this. I mean, of course, I was like, oh, I'm back in the tank and everything. And it was so funny. And then actually I looked it up just for fun. And then I found your video where you actually did this experiment where you were in the tank with this, what is it called? Oxygen
oximeter
meter
or
whatever.
Yeah.
And you just, because it seems like a lot of people kind of get at least once this kind of, oh my God, is there enough air in here? I'm going to die.
Oh my God.
Of course, and of course there was some part of me was starting the dying process, but of course that part wasn't very interested in the dying process and found a way to take me out of this. But I can also say long floats seem to, have a different effect, and I would like to look into this more, but again, it's a bit hard to find a good floating center around here. Yeah. So we have to see.
Me too. That's one of the beauties of when you get a tank in your home is it's unlimited whenever you want, as long as you want. It's pretty powerful. I mean, when our target customer is the hardcore floater, floating more than once a week, and so when those people get a home float tank, like the sky is the limit. They just go crazy. They float constantly.
Yeah, maybe that's a good point to, of course, talk a little bit about the Zen float, because it's a very unique thing that you cooked up there. I mean, just float tanks have been around since the 60s maybe? I don't know.
I think even the 50s.
In the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course they've been big and chunky and expensive and a lot of maintenance and everything. And I mean, who could afford a $10,000 dollar floating tank in a basement? I mean, that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Except when you're Joe Rogan, maybe.
Well, yeah,
that's easy.
There's some rich people, I'm sure, but the average person, that's a bit much. And so you guys, or you came up with a Zen float tent just a year back or 2 years back. Tell us a little bit about how that came into being, because and also what it is, of course. I mean, because listeners might not have heard of it before.
Yeah, so like I said, I was putting the plans out online, and that's when I bumped into my partner with Zen, William, and we began. I mean, the idea was his to make this thing out of canvas, and to me, that's the magic idea, is making it out of something flexible and shippable and small. But we took a couple years and designed the hell out of it. We prototyped the hell out of it. I had the first prototype in my upstairs bedroom, and the first one had a leak, and it flooded my house and the garage, and there was salt everywhere.
Oh no. Yeah,
and I actually had to ask my wife to run upstairs and hold her finger on a hole while I ran to the store to get radiator car plug so I could come back and plug it up.
Talking about sticking the finger in the dam.
Oh my God, that was a hard one. I was like, so will you just sit here and hold your finger on this while I run? And she didn't want the float tank upstairs anyway, so this was just beautiful.
Well, she was giving you a lot about that, I guess. I told you, don't put it up there.
So we got new carpet, so that I'm okay now.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Is she using the floating tank? Is she a floater?
No, she's only floated a couple times. She's surprisingly not that into it.
Oh, okay.
I think she could get into it, but I don't know. It's almost like this is my thing and she does her own thing. I've often wondered why she doesn't float more. I'll have to ask her again. We go to the conferences and everyone assumes that she's really an aggressive, hardcore floater, but she's not.
Well, my wife also doesn't want to go into a float tank. I mean, I always tell her, like, yeah, you should try it. And she said, nah, I don't want to, because I think she's also a bit afraid of the dark. And also, she's like, oh, what about all these other people who've been in there? Say, it's not called the Dead Sea for nothing. If there's 800 pounds of salt in there, plus you have these filter systems, it's perfectly fine.
Oh my God.
Still, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's good.
No, I was going to say, I've taken care of, I had a hot tub, and of course I have float tanks, but float tanks are so much more easy to maintain. That salt is so sanitary, or what's the word? It's
Hmm.
kind of antibacterial just because it is so salty. Because the hot tub was hard to take care of. That takes a lot of effort, but the float tanks are
Yeah,
pretty
because
easy.
that really prefers. I mean, this helps grow things like a hot tub, but
Yeah.
I guess salt water usually is not so good for life in that amount of salt. I mean, of course, salt water oceans are, but this is so much salt. As I say, they call it the Dead Sea.
Yeah, it's
Where
fairly easy.
yeah.
Where
So yeah,
Yeah,
you okay? So the first one broke. You
yeah,
had
yeah.
a kind of leak, and then you
Yeah, the first one
continue.
broke. We prototyped. We went into the Kickstarter and we kept delaying it. I mean, the product was really hard to design for a few reasons. One was, I mean, we had to get thousands of yards of this canvas stuff. That's one of the reasons we went to Kickstarter, because I mean, the money up front was huge. That we had to come up with like $50,000 just in canvas. Um,
The material, yeah.
yeah.
Let's backtrack 1 second for some of the audience
Uh-huh.
members that usually, as you said before, I mean, a float tank is really a big chunk. It's like a bathtub with a lid on it, but much bigger,
Uh-huh.
much heavier. There's all this machinery like filter systems and pumps and all this going on. So, as you said before, it's not only was it very expensive or is expensive, but it's also incredibly hard to transport and set up and all these things. And then when you're talking about canvas, I'm also trying to help some of the German listeners who are trying to, with the English is
Yeah.
basically it's a flexible material. It's like a tent. That's why it's called Zen Float tent. If you guys listeners look it up on the web, of course there will be a link on the show notes. It looks like a tent in a way,
Yeah,
and,
totally.
and so that's yeah okay. And the canvas, that's the main ingredient basically, or the main building material. And as you say, you needed a lot of that, and of course you had to pay for it. So you use Kickstarter to collect some of the money.
Yeah, and I mean, we were just going through all sorts of testing, and it was kind of endless. And our users were getting very irritated because we were going to launch in the fall, then we were going to launch in, I don't know, January, February, and then it was finally pushed back to April. But by the time we launched, I mean, people were really ready. In fact, I clicked launch the morning, the morning of on Kickstarter, and I clicked launch, and I refreshed within like 5 seconds, and 2 tanks were sold. And I was like, what the hell? And then I waited a few minutes, clicked it again, and 5 tanks were sold. And then I started just, I mean, we were so excited. It was like a thrill ride. I couldn't believe that it was working. I mean, I could believe it was working, but not at that speed. We did 45,000 our first day. We did 100,000 our first week. It was just incredible. And we were on the news and the homepage of Yahoo and MSN Innovations, and it was big. It was really big, and it was like so fulfilling for me because, of course, I started out, building them in my basement and battling panic and anxiety, and then feeling like I wanted to help other people, be able to float affordably in their home, and then the idea to fruition, and it was for me, it was just like it was as good as it gets. It was so neat feeling that it was going to work, and from there, this is when the real work starts after everything. We get the cash, and we were going to deliver in 2 months, and we specifically didn't do anything else. We didn't do any promotion, trade show. We didn't do the float conference because we were going to deliver on time. And with all of our great intentions and hard work, we still were late. I think we were a month and a half late or something. But the people were okay. And then so we tested on, I would say, maybe 5 tanks out that we already were beta testing.
Yeah.
And then we sent out our, 186 tanks out into the world, and oh my God, you would never guess everything that could happen to 186 tanks out in the wild. We had like GFCI issues. So GFCIs protect you from getting shocked and killed in the water.
That's a good thing to
If
have.
Yeah, it's a great thing to have. So our GFCIs would have trouble in older homes, or you would go to like a different country and a GFCI that should work, and I say should work, so they all worked, but some would trip off. So they would sense an electrical pulse or something, they'd
Mm-hmm.
trip off, and then this sort of thing would happen. And then so we're dealing with GFCI issues, and then we're dealing with the water cleanliness issues, like when people. I mean, people from all around the world, all different types of water, taking care of it in all different ways, and I'm guilty too. I don't take care of stuff just like the instruction manual says. So we had water cleaning stuff, and then we had, it was like that was when the real work began. So that was version one, and we just launched version 1.5, I would say, a few months ago, and if you go to zenfloatco.com, you can see all the version 1.5 changes, but we had a lot of work to do. And the only way we found out was by launching it into the wild. Looking back, if we could do it over again, I think we would have came up with the money to make 20 tanks and send those out around the world for more like a beta team. Because I mean,
yeah, but on the other hand, that's, I mean, hindsight is 2020 all the time. That's the thing. In
it
a
is
way and it's a very it's a first. I mean, it's a very unique product that you guys came up with. I mean, nobody has ever done that before, and so I mean, with everything, like even if Apple brings out a new operating system, you know, there's a lot of bugs still in there.
Yeah.
They have to do another one very quickly after that. It just seems to be in the matter of things.
It does, and people have been really cool about it. I mean, I can only think of a handful of people who have been really mad at us. In fact, one just happened recently, but the feeling was, hey, you know, like I want all these new upgrades for free. I don't want to pay for them. And for us, it was like, well, you know, if your tank works and if you follow directions, it works like it's supposed to. But I mean, we can't upgrade everyone's tank for free just because we've improved it. And so outside of
It's a bit like I want the iPhone 6s for free because I bought the iPhone 6.
yeah, that's how we felt about it. And I mean, we have a 1 year warranty on everything, and we got the 10-year on the canvas, and so we make sure it works like it's supposed to. But we can't upgrade everyone, and most people have understood that. In fact, we offer the upgrades at a great discount, so people have been pretty cool.
So just give us some of the technicalities, like I mean, how big is it, how much is it, you know, I think I just saw that you are now also offering international versions again, but you did a little different with what you did the first time, because there might be people who are have been using float tanks, or and also, you know, like comparing it with the ones that you have in a float center. What's the difference, and also what's the price difference and everything like that.
Okay, so like the float center, like you said, are the hard style tank, and you're gonna pay. I think the next most affordable tank is a freaking awesome tank. It's called the Escape Pod, and I think you can get into one of those for $7,000 or $8,000. The owner's name is Jeremy. He's a really cool guy, but that's kind of the next step above ours. So our tank.
And that's a hard shell one, or is it also kind of a canvas idea? I mean,
so that's a hard shell, and it's what they call traditional. So when I say floating at home, you need a tank that can be broken down and gotten through doorways. So from the float tent, the next step would be the Escape Pod, and that's you could collapse that, get it in a room, and those are beautiful, and it's a really solid tank. But ours is totally groundbreaking because it's $1,850. I don't know how that converts to euros, but
roughly the same these days. Yeah, a little less in euros, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I think you have to add the shipping and also maybe some customs. I don't know.
Yeah, and I bet you to Germany it would take. This is just a total guess, but I would guess it would take a few $100s. I'm not sure.
Yes, it does. I checked it. I think it's maybe 300. I'm not sure, but it's a few $100.
So what happened? I mean, the specs in metrics, because we have the stupid measurement system. I really wish we were on the metric system, but it's 240 centimeters long, the footprint, and it's 120 centimeters wide, and then it's about 160 tall. Does that make sense? I don't usually talk in metrics, so
that's perfect.
Okay, and then so that's the size of the tank. In the tank, there's a couple pumps. One circulates the water, and then one is kind of a mechanical filter that filters down to a micron. You can control the temperature of the water in half degrees. Let me think.
Is there actually a difference? I mean, that's interesting that you say that, and I think I read that somewhere else before, because when I first heard about those things, I assumed, it's body temperature, which is usually the same, but it actually isn't the same with everybody. And some people can kind of get a little hot, even if it's just a half degree too hot. And so you kind of, I mean, the perfect float would maybe even adjust it to every specific person. Is that true?
Absolutely. So I'm like pretty hot blooded. Like I like sleeping in a cold room, but when I get in a float tank, I keep mine a little lower because I don't like. Of course, you're not supposed to float in a warm water. You're just supposed to float in nothing water, which is your skin temp. But the ability to tune your tank to you is awesome. So like I keep I keep the room at about 78 degrees, and then I'll keep mine at like 93. But sometimes, depending on the seasons, it'll go up or down to match my skin temperatures. That's nice because I've gone in float centers before, and their water felt warm to me, almost to the point of like a little. I felt like I was sweating a little, and that's bad. That you might as well be in a tub. You know, you're the idea is nothing. So yeah, that's a really important function of our tank is the ability to tune it.
Yeah, I've also been in a tank where I was a little too cold, for example, and
Yep.
it's. I never thought about it because for whatever reason I always thought, oh, body temperature is always the same with everybody because otherwise you get fever. But then I got no. It's actually this is a tiny variations which actually make a big difference.
They do. They make a huge difference. And if you tune your room right, so the air temperature, because the tank draws air in naturally with with a chimney effect. So if you get your room right, the air drawing in, you don't feel it, and the water feels perfect, and everything feels just right. And you can dial it in, and it's amazing. So it's a great part of having your own float tank, to be honest. The reason,
Uh,
go ahead.
yeah. No, I read that the tent shape is no coincidence. Maybe
No.
you can tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so this is one of the big things with our patent is it's all about minimizing drips. And so with drips, it's all about, how much of the ceiling is on a horizontal plane. So the design is very, very specific where almost the entire ceiling is on an angle, just like a pyramid, and minus the very tip. But there's virtually no drips. When you first hop in a float tent, if you smack off all the walls so the condensation falls off, you usually won't have a drip or two. So it's really it's an awesome design for that.
That's a great idea because I actually experienced that when I was in Holland in the tank. That especially if you float longer and there's more condensation going on, then at some point the drip starts. And I don't think I've ever experienced that with a short, like 1 hour floats. But as soon as I went for 90 minutes or 2 hours, that thing started. And I think it's a very great idea to put the pyramid on top of it so that there can't be drip. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been so happy with that design. In fact, I'm convinced it's the best ceiling design. I know a lot of companies heat their ceilings so that condensation doesn't start, but
Hmm.
so companies, I mean, I'm not saying ours is like the only tank that doesn't drip because there's a lot that have good designs, but ours seems pretty effortless as far as the shape. So
Yeah, I mean that also might make it more expensive again because then you have to also heat the lid. I mean it's at least one more component
mhm.
which you have to pay for in the end. So not having to do that, just using the shape of the ceiling is pretty ingenious.
Yeah, it's been really awesome. What I wanted to mention, so when we launched our Kickstarter, we sold a variety of different versions, plug versions. So we
Hmm.
sold UK, Australia, Canada, I think Germany. So we offered all these things, and what ended up happening is it threw this giant wrench in production. Like we could not put on all these plugs and troubleshoot all these different plug types. So what ended up happening is we went to only U.S. tanks for a while, just to get the business going, to get cash coming in again, so we could, buy more. But we had so much demand for international tanks that we decided let's put out the 240, the 240 volt version, and we'll just leave it unfinished. So the plug ends are just end wires, and we just tell people, you're going to need professional installation. They'll throw on plug ends in a GFCI, and it's excuse me, it's totally working, and people are buying it and getting professional installation. So we're happy for now. I'm sure we'll start breaking off countries and making specific plug types, but for now it's working really well.
Yeah, that's good. I mean it's not a big thing to add.
No.
Yeah, that's probably easier on your end.
Yeah, it's a lot, and especially in this beginning phase of the startup. Oh my God, it's crazy. You would think there's a bunch of money left over, but there's just not. There's like there's seven of us now. We're a virtual company, but the amount of supply we have to order and then freight and waiting. We're making it, we're doing it, but there's not a lot extra right now.
We should probably also mention, for if anybody's interested in getting a tank, that you also of course have to buy about 800 pounds of Epsom salt,
Yes.
which I don't know. I mean, I'd only give a quick Google, I think, at Amazon or something, and it was like 800, like 700, 800 euro, but that might have not been the cheapest version. So I don't know. Do you have any? Is there differences actually in the salt? I mean, is this always the same, or is there like better salt or not so good salt, or do you have any
Yeah,
input on that?
yeah. So we sell salt, and as far as I know, we have the most affordable float salt in the U.S. But I don't know out of country. You're gonna have to source it yourself. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing about salt is there's all sorts of different. So the grades will be the same, and the grade you need to shoot for is USP. But what's interesting is you could take like a handful of people's salts, and some will be more yellow than others.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the advice I would give to make sure you get the right salt, but definitely buy from a trusted supplier and get USP. So that's a US guideline. I don't know how if it works that way like in Germany. I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, usually everything is very controlled in
Yeah.
Germany. So I would guess that most of the salt you buy is probably also like 100% certified or whatever. Otherwise, they won't allow you to sell it. But I'm sure people can figure that out if they're interested. I was just wanted to mention that that's an additional cost and also additional effort because you have to also get it to your home,
Oh man.
and put it in, and that's.
But how often did you have to change the salt?
Yeah, if you're floating, 2, 3 times a week, you could get a year out of your salt, no
Oh,
problem.
that's good.
Really?
Yeah, and
Whoa.
what you'll find is that the your water is going to be clean. It'll smell fresh if you maintain it right, but there'll be a certain amount of like maybe body oils or oils that kind of stay in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great question because part of me feels like you could just use your water for a long, long time, but then part of me knows the feeling of fresh water. It's just more crisp, and I don't know how to. I don't. Anyway, we recommend swapping salt out yearly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, another thing also is, of course, usually people should take a shower before they hop into a
Oh,
tank. I mean,
that's
that's usually
big.
that's what they do in the float, and it feels much better also for yourself,
It
not only for everybody else.
it does, but when people don't, shower off before and get clean, I mean, it adds a lot of maintenance to your tank. So, but if you get in totally clean, I mean, you're not doing much to the water, so it's pretty awesome.
Great. So you mentioned that and we know about this that the Kickstarter campaign was a big hit in the beginning, and of course there's been a lot of interest in this. Do you have any idea why? Because as we mentioned earlier, the tank itself was invented in the 50s, and I mean there was floating tanks for decades, at least some of. I mean not many. I mean there's some in big cities, but now it seems like there's a big rush again. And do you have any idea how that came about?
I I know they had the AIDS scare, which really put a dent in the
Oh
industry.
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and then so outside of that, uh, it's coming back. So if I had to give my theory on why it's ramping up so fast, it's because I feel like just with society now, we have this huge amount of intake overload with our phones, computers, devices, everything's beeping and buzzing, and all the networks and social media. And I feel like people are getting so overstimulated that this is kind of like this is the opposite of our current condition in society. So I feel like it's this natural progression where people are just overloading, and panic and anxiety and depression, everything's going up. A lot of these mental, I guess you'd call them illnesses, are going up, and the float tank I feel like is the opposite direction. And so I feel like people are finally going there, finally going to nothing and turning it off and closing it down, and bringing their mind down. It seems like the holistic, the meditation, all these things are really growing fast, and I think people are just looking for this natural help.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Are there any medical studies that back up the benefits of floating?
Yes. There's a lot of medical studies in my book. I cite a lot of the different studies, but what's interesting is the studies, for the most part, have been done on a smaller scale. But now that floating's taking off, there's a guy named Justin Feinstein, I believe, but he works for the Laria Institute. I believe it's brain research. But he has a whole floor of a hospital, and he's built all these custom float tanks, and he's leading the way in the science. But he has access to patients every day, float tanks every day, and he can do huge studies. They just covered him in Time magazine recently some of his research, but he's the guy that's going to really bring the floating research to the mainstream, I believe. He's got the tools and the access and the support where he will be the notable researcher behind all this. So it's really cool. But there's a lot of guys that blazed the path before him, but they just didn't have the resources, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like you mentioned anxiety, you also mentioned depression. I also remember in your book you were talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's the psychological part where a float tank can help. So if people suffer from any of those conditions, you would advise or you would suggest like a float tank is a good way to help with that.
Absolutely. And I wish I had the specific studies with me. I should have my book with me, but
No problem.
PTSD,
We can link to it.
they're having pretty epic breakthroughs with PTSD in a float tank. And what's interesting is Justin is taking the science he's separating it from, so they say there's a science behind, meditation and that sort of thing with relief, and he's separating it and actually proving that the float tank is more than all the other. It's not more than the other therapies, but it's how would I word it? It's different. It's not just meditation. It's actually more. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it might be meditation in the sense that it is easier to actually get into the meditative state. I mean, for me personally, I can say that because when you sit and meditate, it's something's always bothering you, or there might even be noises, or I mean you're still feeling your body and your aches and everything, but when you're in the float tank, it's much easier to let go.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's actually what meditation is about in a way. And I mean, of course, I'm not familiar with the studies, and I'm just thinking a little bit about it. And it's maybe it accelerates the time that you actually need to get into a meditative state if you're not a professional meditator.
Oh, yeah.
You are in that state, and of course, that is a very helpful state for the mind and the body.
Absolutely. And another direction they're taking it is the physical relief. Fibromyalgia, there's a pretty big study going on right now that, they're getting a lot of relief. So fibromyalgia is a pain disorder.
Yes.
And then they're also proving, in the sports science that recovery is cut down. And in my book, I talked to a guy named Yassine, and he is an ultra marathon runner. So he's running like 100-mile races. And it used to take him 2 weeks to recover. But since he's found floating, he recovers in half the time. So that's a story, but they're bringing the science to the recovery because the Epsom salt, the soothing the muscles, because people do the Epsom salt baths already, but this is like such a high concentration of Epsom salt, and your spine in the zero gravity, it decompresses, joints decompress, and it's pretty powerful. So, but it feels like right now is the real proving. It's like everyone knows it's working, but it's time to really prove it even more. But I'm sure if a previous float researcher heard this podcast, they would be offended because a lot's already been proven.
Yeah, but it's true that the scientific method and also like the modern version of it. There might have been a study 20, 30 years ago, but people always want the new stuff and they want to do it again. They want to really make sure. And if it proves it's good.
Yeah, like a large scale too, I think is important to a lot of people.
That is true. Otherwise, they will just say it's anecdotal evidence, and who knows? It might just be placebo or whatever. I mean, it's good that you also mentioned that the salt itself has some properties. It's not just there for you to stay afloat, but it also works on your skin and also on other things.
Totally.
Is that true?
Yeah, and they say that most people have a sodium deficiency. So one of the things they're proving right now, because there's people who just fully believe that the sodium penetrates the skin. Trying to remember the word, something dermal. It gets in your body through the skin, and there's people that say that it doesn't. And so that's one of the things they're proving right now, because sodium goes so fastly through your system that they're having to measure and prove that it does penetrate the skin. So that's one of the things they're working on too.
So it's psychological, it's physical, and then of course there's the spiritual side of the whole thing. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's going on, or if did you have any experiences? What do you say is happening there?
Yeah, it's funny for the book. I really wanted to tackle spiritual exploration in a float tank, and I had my own version of what that meant for me. And I talked to a lot of people that had totally different versions. Like I think of like Duncan Trussell. His version of spiritual exploration is entirely different than mine. His is like flying off and connecting with other beings, and to me that's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And but mine was different. Mine felt more like alignment with purpose and what I'm supposed to be doing, and feeling like I was in line with the universe. So in the book I talk about how spiritual exploration, what makes you a spirit is, in fact, when you remove your body and the physical world, kind of what's left is the spiritual dimension. So I talk about in the book how I'm not going to go into what that means for you or me or God or universe or whatever you believe, but there's nothing quite like a float tank to make you so unhuman, because you get in there, you're no longer a body, you're no longer in an environment, you're no longer, sounds and things that define you as a human being, or that make me Shane. So in a float tank, you're entirely spiritual. There's nothing quite left but you and your thoughts and your it's if anything, I want people to understand that it's the most powerful environment for something like spiritual exploration, because there's nothing left. There's nothing that made you human in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
If
that's
that
a
makes
good
sense.
point. Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, that's exactly because the no distractions also from what you really. I mean, we always talk about thoughts and that many people believe they are their thoughts, but when you're in the floating tank, or they are their body, or first the body goes away, the environment goes away, and the thoughts at some point also go away,
Yeah.
and then what's left is probably closer to what you really are than what you thought you were before.
I know, isn't that
Uh,
interesting? Like, I think one of the things that led me into panic and anxiety was I believed that my thoughts were me, or I believed that, okay, well, if I feel like I'm going crazy, then I'm going crazy, and if I feel like everything's going to collapse, everything's going to collapse. So it's almost like I believed the thoughts were real, and I believed there was like substance to the thoughts. I believed if I was thinking them, I was going there, and it was
mm-hmm.
interesting because part of my relief from panic and anxiety was realizing that thoughts are nothing. They're almost just like a message board, and you decide which ones that you act on or which ones feel correct. Because panic and OCD, or excuse me, panic and anxiety for me was also OCD. And I hate to give everything definitions because it's hard to define, but I would think thoughts that were just kind of disturbing to me, and that was part of the reason I felt so anxious. And it's funny because I had to really come to the conclusion that a creative mind can think disturbing thoughts, but that's not you. It's your actions and your intentions and what you care about, or better yet, how the thoughts made you feel. Because if the thoughts scared you, then that's all the more reason that the thought isn't you, because it's not in line with you. So it was interesting for me.
That's a very great way to put it together, because the thoughts that make you fear or get you scared, they're really there to keep the thought going and also distract you from the fact that you're not the thought, because they are so strong that of course makes you believe, oh, that must be me, because it's so strong and it's so loud. And only if you, as you say, it's like a canvas. It's like, I always say, it's like a screen in a movie theater. You can watch it and it might be a horror movie or it might be a comedy, but there's still somebody watching the movie.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's more, I mean, that's my personal way of as I say, everybody's got their own way of trying to word it and figure it out. But
Yeah, and the mental world is so hard to define. So sometimes like titles oversimplify it, but I feel the same way. It's very much you're a witness to a thinking machine.
mhm, exactly, the witnessing, that's a major point that we always talk about here as well, that we say, that's basically try to be the witness of your life and don't get sucked into it all the time. Especially, I mean, in both ways, you know, people can get totally sucked into the negative, but also into the positive way. And I mean, even though it feels nicer to be in the positive, it can also distract you in a way from who you really are. So it's always kind of the trick to maintain some kind of detachment, which doesn't mean you don't feel anything, you know. I mean, but I guess you know what I'm talking about.
I do. I totally do.
What would you say? Who should check out floating and who maybe not?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I would say initially, if the idea intrigues you and you think there may be something there for you, you've got to try it. And you've got to try it at least a few times because sometimes people's first or second floats are a little awkward, a little uncomfortable. They're spinning in space. They're trying to get comfortable in a float tank. So if it intrigues you and you think there could be something there for you, you got to try it, and you got to try it at least 3 times. And if what I'm talking about or floating sounds totally foreign and stupid and pointless, then I think the place to start would be guided meditations. Because if I feel like if you can get something out of a guided meditation, you can get a lot out of floating. But like I talk to people all the time who are like, that sounds totally pointless. And I'm like, well, then you're missing like one of the earlier pieces. So you have to believe that turning off and turning down your mind is a good thing. So start with a guided meditation.
Yeah.
And are there people who shouldn't float? I mean, is there any? Did you ever encounter a people or group of people who shouldn't do it or who wouldn't benefit?
That's a good question. So maybe a really strong claustrophobic. Even then, I would recommend trying it. But it is an enclosed environment that's dark and that sort of thing. But I can't think of anyone who would be bad. I would say if you were really battling some mental illness, that it wouldn't hurt to actually run the idea by your therapist or your doctor, because I
And
would
maybe
hate to
don't do it. Yeah,
exacerbate a mental illness.
right. But and maybe don't do it. I mean, of course, you kind of would be alone in the tank, but maybe have somebody, you know, in the room and be in contact just in case, you know, you feel like, oh, I'm losing it or anything. And I also think it's, at least for our listeners in Berlin, I haven't been at the center, but I think there is a fairly new floating center which doesn't have a lid. It's basically a big tub.
Rooms.
And they it's a room. It's basically they just heat the room and turn off the light and everything. I haven't used it, so I can't really comment. But I was in way intrigued because this would at least take out this feeling to be in a box, because you know, you are not you're in a room in a big bathtub basically. So
Those are ideal for if you're concerned about having space and feeling okay. And in fact, Justin Feinstein, I always say his name wrong. He, in his hospital where he's doing his research, he made rooms because
Okay.
he found that patients with mental issues found much more comfort in a room. So
Yeah, that does totally make sense. Yeah, I think we're also gonna do a little some notes, of course, about like where to find float centers here in Germany, and if there's people all over the world listening to this, I'm sure we'll also find like a big link where there's a whole bunch of float centers all around the world, and of course you can just Google floating, or sometimes
you can order yourself
a Zen float tank. Yeah, right.
there you go.
That's a very good thing. Yeah, we've been actually talking about it. It's Gary and I, we were thinking about sharing one, but we still first have to actually figure out the space. It's I mean, the cost is totally fine, but you also need a space to put it. And so we're just trying to figure that out, if we can find it somewhere, because we don't live in the same place, and you know, I live with my family and he lives here, and anything, we will have to figure that out. But it's very intriguing because I really enjoy floating a lot, and I think it's really a great way to connect with yourself.
Yeah.
Totally, and it's really nice to have a nice float space. Like I have a float room, and it's just nice. A lot of people put them in their bedrooms, and it got pretty crowded, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And right next to your bed, no room left. But Yeah, so that's the first step is finding that room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one thing, and we'll work on that. So maybe this will work out. But do you think that for the foreseeable future you will also offer the international versions? Is this like a mainstay now, or do you think it's going to be in waves like you did
Yeah, this
before?
this unwired version is for sure a mainstay, but I would say
Okay.
as time goes on, we will end up making finished electrical for all the different countries, for some of the main countries.
Mm-hmm.
Floating is really big in like I'm trying to so of course the UK, but then Australia is really a big floating country. You'd be surprised.
Okay. Huh.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Never heard about that.
Did you get orders from Germany?
Yeah, we got a bunch of orders from Germany.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's really difficult in certain parts, as I mentioned before, to find a float tank. It's
It's
kind of
totally unknown here.
well,
Mm.
there are a few, but they are far in between, and there's always a long
The one in nearby is what is it?
a dentist clinic,
Dentist, private dentist hospital. Is it kind of hospital?
dentist clinic. Yeah, yeah, kind
Dentist
of.
clinic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, they're charging lots of money
But
for
it's
one
interesting
hour.
because I think they use it actually for kind of relaxing the people.
Yeah,
Because
their
of course a lot of
patients.
people are anxious to go to the dentist, so they figured we put a float tank there and people can float and then go to the dentist and feel more relaxed.
Yeah,
That's
and
Smart.
it's shaped like a what is it?
a shell.
A shell.
Yeah, there's these kinds of. Do you ever seen those? The shell-shaped
Oh yeah.
float tanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are
And
cool looking.
what was annoying was that the lid doesn't close off
The light.
entirely. So
Oh,
there was always a little tiny light coming through, and that drove me crazy
Oh yeah,
because
it should.
because I paid so much money. And want the whole experience, and there was always coming this light into the tank, and I told the girl at the when I was done, and she said, "Yeah, well, it's broken. Some heavy dude just I don't know did something with the lid. I don't know."
To me, that is such a big deal because one of the things I really enjoy about floating is the fact that you can have your eyes wide open and you can't
Yeah,
see
sure.
anything. You're just off
Yeah,
in
yeah,
space.
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the whole point. I mean,
That's the whole point,
no
really.
light, no sound, no nothing, and then if there's, I mean, another thing I don't even think we've mentioned it before, but a lot of float tanks for people who are a little bit anxious in the beginning, they also have a light that you can turn on, and also
Yes.
you can even pump music into the whole environment if you like. I
Yeah,
mean,
this kind of spheric.
any kind of music. I mean, you can just give him your iPod and play AC/DC if you like. I mean, if that's your idea
AC/DC
of
float.
relaxing. Okay, all right. I mean,
That's another
everybody.
type of float I didn't cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
AC/DC float.
Yeah.
Do you, by the way, do you recommend? Not recommend is maybe the wrong word, but what's your take on when people smoke cannabis before and just
Yeah, like the Joe Rogan does. I think he sometimes mentions that he smokes dope before he enters, or some weed
Oh,
yeah
before he
so
goes
what
into.
so this is a big one for me right now because Joe Rogan is all about that. In fact, he does edibles and he floats. And Duncan Trussell, he's all about. Well, actually, Duncan Trussell was initially all about it, but he said once he got his tank, he preferred sober floating, which is totally
Right.
interesting.
yeah
Yeah, for me, honestly, especially now that it's getting legalized around in different states, I do want to try it out, and I think it could be very, very powerful, and I think you could have some really amazing experiences. But I haven't personally done it, and in fact, when I, 10 years ago when I had the panic anxiety, the last time I smoked sent me into a tailspin, and a really bad one, and it just freaked me out. It was awful. So now that they have designer marijuana where you can get low mental, high physical.
Mm-hmm.
You can get it by design. So because I got a book recently, and it goes over all the different strains and the different cannabinoids and how they affect you. But there's even anxiety prescribed marijuana. So for me, if I decide to do it, I want to get kind of designer stuff and get it right. But I could only imagine the power if everything went well with your high, adding a
Right.
float tank environment would be pretty crazy. It's so intriguing to me that I bought a few books and I read and I know exactly how and what I would do now. So I think it'll probably happen. I'm just still a little scared.
Right. Yeah, I can totally get that. But you probably shouldn't drink alcohol
No,
before
I
you
no.
tried
enter. I
I
mean,
tried that and it was really stupid.
okay.
It was really stupid. I drank. I had a bunch of drinks, and I wanted to see what it was like to float, with a really good buzz, and it was
Yeah.
really stupid. It was like I couldn't settle in. I couldn't calm down. My mind was kind of belligerently just jumping around, and it was pointless. So that's my take on the the drunk float.
Yeah. Okay. No drunk float, please.
No drunk
Sounds
float.
good.
Yeah, and you might
Great.
drown, so that'd be bad.
Yeah. All right. I don't know. I mean, do you want to add a little bit, or is there anything we haven't covered, which is dear to your heart about the whole topic, or do you think we kind of covered the? I mean, it was just a basic introduction thing today. I mean, so I don't know if there's anything we missed.
No, if you don't mind, I'll just cover a few things that we kind of tell everyone.
Sure.
So we tell anyone who a lot of people see the float tent and they get so excited because they can float affordably and maybe they've never floated. But we don't want people who've never floated buying a float tent. We want everyone who's interested in floating to go to a float center at least a few times and make sure they love it. They love the habit, the therapeutic effect, and then get the float tent if it fits. We don't want people buying float tents and then becoming totally uninterested because they never tried it out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's one thing we always push. I think we have all the different float centers on our website. I don't know how well we have like Germany covered, but I know the U.S. is very well covered. So anyway, try out that. If you're curious about floating, and I'm not just promoting my book because it's my book, but I wrote the book because it needed to be written. There was no book that really all encompassed all the different aspects of floating, from physical, mental, sports, spiritual, all that stuff. So my book is honestly the best way to get to see everything floating has to offer in a one night read. I think you could read it in 2 to 3 hours, or you could browse the parts you're interested in real quick. And it's Kindle, it's nothing. I think it's $3 physical
Yeah,
copies.
it's really inexpensive.
Yeah, and that's a great way to just get a real taste of what it has to offer. Trying to think if I missed anything.
Of course, there's your website. I mean, there's I think even like 2 or something. Like there's certainly the Zen Float tent one, but also you have a personal website, don't you?
Yeah, I'm working on my personal website. It's funny. I put my site up really for me and partly the blog, and I started writing things I found interesting. And then I found out that no one finds me that interesting. So now I'm just writing because I enjoy it. But I have a lot of these just little philosophies and ideas, and yeah. If you're interested, try it out. And I love feedback, but I'm not sure I will change anything because it's kind of for me. I'm debating starting a podcast right now, and
Oh, great.
maybe you guys could teach me some things. Maybe I'll email you some questions, but.
Sure.
That's kind of what I'm up to. So it's funny. A lot of people don't know how I got started in business and career was in a family business, and we make tape and glue for wigs and hair extensions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Gerry,
So,
I think there's something for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
wig tape and float tanks that's what I do. So my grandpa started that in '85. I've been there for the last 8.5 years or so, and that's really where I learned how to run and function in a business. So that's my main. Well, now it's about 50-50. I do that, a few days a week. I do the float with the rest, and this is life. But now I got a son, so everything's changing again. But we'll see.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
So we're certainly going to link to both your websites, also your book, which I also liked a lot reading, and I think it's really a good primer for the whole thing.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks for writing it. And of course, yeah, as soon as you got the podcast started, give us some kind of link or email so that we can also let our listeners know about it.
Oh, thank you.
That would be great. Gerry, do you have any?
No, I'm pretty much covered.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. Ours is almost ending, so over here the moon is rising, actually pretty high, full moon, dark, and I guess what's your time now? Like
It's almost lunchtime.
almost lunchtime.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, great.
Well, thanks for having me,
Okay.
guys. It's been awesome chatting with you guys. Seriously.
Thank you for being our second international guest.
Yeah.
It was great talking
Thank
to
you very much, Shane.
Thanks, guys. Stay in touch.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
All right.
Well,
Thank you so much, Shane. That was
Yes.
great.
Great conversation.
Very good conversation. Very interesting. Of course, only scraping
The surface.
The surface.
The
It's just the
surface.
tip of the iceberg. Just a primer. Just a floating for dummies version. So if you want to know more about it, we certainly recommend Shane's book, The Zen Float Cure. No, the Float Cure, is it? Let me just check before I say anything stupid. What's it called? Here is The Float Tank Cure. Sorry. The Float Tank Cure is a book you can get for just, I think $3 or $4 on a Kindle. Or if you prefer the hard copy, it's a bit more expensive, but you can find it on Amazon and also on his website. His website is zenfloatco.com or shanestott.com. That's more his private website, and the zenfloatco.com is where you can learn anything you want about the float tent. Of course, there's a few other books and other websites about floating. We will link to those in our show notes. So if you want to check them out, I'll just spell the website just for the patient people. In the beginning, I didn't want it. It's www.viele
Yes.
WEGEFUEHREN NACHOM.com.
You lost me. You lost
yeah,
me.
I lost everybody, I'm sure. But you can play it very slowly. So it's basically Viele Wege führen nach. That's the German title, and we always say it's many roads lead to when we use the English title, that's the translation.
Yes,
So anyway, but also you can just Google Zen Float. That's probably way easier, and then you can find everything you need to know about Shane and his really great invention. So thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in keeping in touch with us, you can subscribe to us on iTunes. You can find us on YouTube. And
if you're interested in floating, just check if your city is having sometimes their floating centers.
In most big cities,
Yes,
there should
in
be,
most big cities.
especially in the States. In other countries, I'm not sure, but if you just Google floating in your
Berlin,
city, in Germany there are a few, and it seems
it
to
out.
be kind of on the rise, as Shane mentioned, with the success of their Kickstarter campaign and their idea. It's interesting. It seems like more people are interested in it, and it's actually a really great. I can just attest from my own personal experience, and you too.
Yes.
It's really an awesome way to spend your time and learn a little bit more about yourself. Okay, doke. Thank you so much, and peace be upon you.
Yeah.
Namaste.
And
All the best in your job, I'll say.
yeah, which, in German, it's funny in German, but
It is?
Yeah.
It is actually.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
It's catching up.
It's catching up.
Yes, a lot
There
of
will be
people
t-shirts.
using this phrase. I can put it on a T-shirt.
Do it. Maybe we make some money this way at some point.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
See you.
Have a good
Bye.
time. Bye-bye.